The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as William stood by the large window in his private study. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his usually composed face showed traces of the sleepless night he had endured. The phone call had come at 3 in the morning, and since then, sleep had been impossible. Kate entered the room quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. She had changed from her nightgown into a simple black dress, understanding without words what this day would bring. Her husband's shoulders were tense, and she could see the weight of responsibility settling on him like a heavy cloak. "The children are still sleeping," she said softly, placing 1 cup on his desk. "I thought we should talk before they wake up." William turned to face her, and Kate saw something in his eyes she had rarely seen before. It wasn't just sadness, but a deep understanding that their lives had changed forever in the span of that single phone call. The news had been delivered with the formal precision that royal announcements always carried, but behind those carefully chosen words was a loss that would reshape the monarchy. "How do we tell them?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do we explain that someone so important to all of us is gone?" Kate moved closer to her husband, reaching for his hand. His fingers were cold despite the warm morning, and she could feel them trembling slightly. This was not the composed Prince William that the public knew. This was a man who had just lost someone who had been like a second father to him. The person they had lost was Lord Chamberlain Sir Edward Fitzwilliam, a man who had served the royal family for over 40 years. He had been present at William and Kate's wedding, had been there when their children were born, and had become a trusted advisor and friend. More than that, he had been the bridge between the old traditions of the monarchy and the modern world that William and Kate were trying to navigate. Sir Edward had collapsed the previous evening during a private dinner at Clarence's house. The doctors said his heart had simply stopped, that at 82 years old it had been his time. But knowing the medical facts did nothing to ease the pain of losing someone who had been such a constant presence in their lives. Kate squeezed William's hand gently. "We tell them the truth, in words they can understand. We tell them that Sir Edward was a good man who helped our family, and that he's gone to be with the angels now." William nodded, though Kate could see he was struggling with something deeper than just the immediate loss. Sir Edward had been working on something important before he died, something that would have significant implications for the future of the monarchy. There were discussions about modernizing certain traditions, about making the royal family more accessible to the people, and about preparing for the eventual transition when William would take on even greater responsibilities. "There's something else," William said, walking over to his desk where a leather-bound folder lay open. Sir Edward had been preparing recommendations for Father about the Commonwealth ceremonies next year. He was going to present them today. Kate looked at the folder, seeing pages of handwritten notes in Sir Edward's distinctive script. The old man had been meticulous in his work, and even in his final days he had been thinking about the future, of the institution he had served so faithfully. He wanted the ceremonies to be different, William continued, flipping through the pages. More inclusive, more representative of the modern Commonwealth. He had ideas about involving young people from all the member nations, about using technology to connect with those who couldn't be there in person. The weight of responsibility was becoming clearer to Kate. Sir Edward hadn't just been an advisor. He had been a visionary who understood that the monarchy needed to evolve to remain relevant. His death meant that William and Kate would need to carry forward his ideas, to ensure that his final contribution to the crown would not be lost. Outside the window, Kate could see the first tourists of the day beginning to gather near the castle gates. In a few hours, the official announcement would be made, and the world would learn of Sir Edward's passing. There would be statements of condolence, formal ceremonies, and all the elaborate protocol that surrounded death in the royal family. But here in this quiet moment, before the machinery of state went into motion, William and Kate were simply two people mourning the loss of a friend. Sir Edward had been the one who had helped Kate navigate the complexities of royal life when she first married William. He had been patient with her questions, gentle with his corrections, and always encouraging when she felt overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon her. "He believed in us," Kate said, looking at the notes spread across the desk. "He believed that we could help the monarchy evolve while still honoring its traditions." William's phone buzzed with another message, probably from his private secretary about the arrangements that needed to be made. But for now, he ignored it, choosing instead to focus on his wife and the quiet strength she always provided during difficult times. "The funeral will be at Westminster Abbey," William said. "Father has already spoken with the Archbishop. It will be a state funeral with full honors." Kate nodded, understanding that this meant days of careful planning, of coordinating with various government officials, of ensuring that every detail reflected Sir Edward's importance to the crown. It would also mean that their private grief would have to be managed alongside their public duties. The sound of small footsteps in the corridor outside reminded them that their children would be awake soon, and that the day ahead would require them to balance their roles as parents with their responsibilities as members of the royal family. George, Charlotte, and Louis would need explanations, comfort, and reassurance that despite this loss, their world remained secure. As Kate and William stood together in the morning light, they both understood that this was more than just a personal loss. Sir Edward's death marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one where they would need to step forward and take on even greater responsibilities for the future of the monarchy they were destined to lead. The official announcement went out at precisely 10 o'clock that morning, delivered through the traditional channels that had served the monarchy for generations. The statement was brief and formal, expressing the royal family's deep sorrow at the passing of Sir Edward Fitzwilliam and acknowledging his decades of faithful service to the crown. Kate sat in the morning room at Kensington Palace, watching the coverage on the news channels. The reporters spoke in the respectful tones reserved for royal deaths, but she could see they were also trying to understand what this loss would mean for the future of the monarchy. Sir Edward had been more than just a ceremonial figure. He had been actively involved in shaping policy and advising on the direction of the royal family in the 21st century. George wandered into the room, still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. At 10 years old, he was beginning to understand more about his family's unique position in the world, but Kate knew that explaining death to children was never easy, especially when that death affected their entire family's future. "Mummy, why is everyone on television talking about Sir Edward?" George asked, climbing onto the sofa beside Kate. Kate turned off the television and pulled her son closer. "Do you remember how Sir Edward would always have those special sweets in his pocket whenever we visited Clarence House?" George nodded, a small smile crossing his face. Sir Edward had always made time for the children, despite his busy schedule and important responsibilities. He had a way of making them feel special and included, even during formal occasions that might otherwise have been overwhelming for young minds. "Well, darling, Sir Edward has gone to heaven," Kate said gently. "His body was very tired and God needed him for something very important in heaven." The explanation seemed to satisfy George for the moment, though Kate knew there would be more questions later. Children processed grief differently than adults, and she wanted to make sure that all three of her children felt secure and loved during this difficult time. William appeared in the doorway, dressed in his dark navy suit, the one he wore for formal royal occasions. His face was composed now, the private grief from the morning replaced by the public mask he had learned to wear when duty called. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, he said to Kate. "We need to go to Clarence House to meet with Father and the other advisors." Kate nodded, understanding that the machinery of royal protocol was already in motion. There would be meetings about the funeral arrangements, discussions about who would take on Sir Edward's responsibilities, and careful consideration of how this change would affect the monarchy's operations. As they prepared to leave, Charlotte and Louis appeared, drawn by the unusual activity in the house. Charlotte, at 8 years old, was particularly perceptive and seemed to sense that something important was happening. Louis, at 5, was more concerned with why everyone looked so serious. Kate knelt down to speak with both children, explaining in simple terms what had happened and assuring them that they were safe and loved. She promised that she and William would be back in time for dinner and that they would talk more about Sir Edward then. The drive to Clarence House was quiet, both William and Kate lost in their own thoughts. The streets of London seemed normal, with people going about their daily business, unaware of the significant loss that had occurred within the royal family. It struck Kate as surreal that the world could continue unchanged while their own world had shifted so dramatically. At Clarence House, they were met by King Charles, whose face showed the strain of the past 12 hours. Sir Edward had been his trusted advisor for longer than Kate had been alive, and the loss was clearly affecting him deeply. The king embraced both William and Kate, a gesture that spoke more than any words could about the gravity of the situation. "He was working until the very end," Charles said as they walked through the familiar corridors. "Even yesterday evening, he was reviewing the plans for the Commonwealth Day celebrations. He wanted everything to be perfect. They gathered in Sir Edward's office, a room that still felt alive with his presence. His desk was exactly as he had left it, with neat stacks of papers, his fountain pen lying beside his leather writing pad, and a photograph of his late wife prominently displayed beside his computer. The other senior advisors were already present, their faces reflecting the same mixture of grief and concern that Kate felt. These were people who had worked closely with Sir Edward for years, who had relied on his wisdom and experience to guide their decisions. His absence left not just an emotional void, but a practical one as well. "We need to discuss the immediate priorities," said Sir James Morrison, the Deputy Private Secretary. "The funeral arrangements are underway, but we also need to address Sir Edward's ongoing projects and responsibilities." Kate listened as the men discussed the various ceremonial duties, the diplomatic protocols, and the administrative tasks that Sir Edward had been managing. It was overwhelming to realize how much one person had been handling, how many different aspects of royal life had been under his careful supervision. William spoke up during a pause in the conversation. "Sir Edward had specific ideas about modernizing the Commonwealth celebrations. I think we should honor his memory by implementing those changes." There was a moment of silence as everyone considered this suggestion. Change came slowly to the monarchy, with each alteration carefully considered and debated. But there was something fitting about using Sir Edward's death as a catalyst for the very reforms he had been advocating. Kate found herself thinking about the conversations she had had with Sir Edward over the years, the way he had helped her understand the delicate balance between tradition and progress. He had often said that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to remain relevant to each new generation while still honoring the history and traditions that gave it meaning. "What exactly did he have in mind?" asked Lord Pemberton, the Lord Chamberlain's deputy. William referred to the notes they had reviewed that morning. "He wanted to include young people from every Commonwealth nation in the ceremonies, not just as observers, but as active participants. He had ideas about using social media to connect with those who couldn't be physically present, and he wanted to showcase the diversity and vitality of the Commonwealth in ways that had never been done before." As the meeting continued, Kate could see that Sir Edward's influence was still present in the room, even in his absence. His ideas, his vision for the future of the monarchy, had taken root in the minds of those who had worked with him. In death, he was still shaping the institution he had served so faithfully. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Clarence House, casting everything in a golden light that seemed both beautiful and melancholy. Kate realized that this was just the beginning of a long process of adjustment, of learning to carry on without Sir Edward's guidance and wisdom. 3 days had passed since Sir Edward's death, and the full weight of the loss was beginning to settle over the royal family. Kate stood in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, looking at the black dress she would wear to the funeral. The fabric was elegant but somber, appropriate for saying goodbye to someone who had been such an important part of their lives. William was already downstairs, taking calls from various heads of state who would be attending the funeral. Sir Edward's influence had extended far beyond Britain, and his death had prompted messages of condolence from around the world. Presidents, prime ministers, and royalty from dozens of countries would be gathering at Westminster Abbey to pay their respects. Kate could hear the distant sound of preparations being made outside. Security teams were coordinating with the Metropolitan Police, ceremonial units were rehearsing their roles, and florists were arranging the thousands of flowers that had arrived from well-wishers. The funeral of someone so close to the monarchy required the same level of planning and precision as any major state event. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see one of her ladies-in-waiting. Instead, it was Princess Anne, William's aunt, looking as composed as ever despite the emotional circumstances. Anne had known Sir Edward longer than anyone in the current royal family, having worked with him since she was a young woman taking on her first official duties. "I wanted to speak with you before the service," Anne said, sitting down in one of the chairs by the window. "Edward would have wanted you to know how proud he was of the work you and William have been doing." Kate felt a tightness in her throat at these words. Sir Edward had never been effusive with praise, but his approval had meant everything to her as she learned to navigate royal life. He had been the one to help her understand that being a member of the royal family wasn't just about attending events and cutting ribbons, but about using her position to make a real difference in people's lives. "He often spoke about how naturally you took to royal duties," Anne continued. "He said you had an instinct for connecting with people that couldn't be taught or learned from books." Through the window, Kate could see crowds beginning to gather along the funeral route. People were carrying flowers and wearing black armbands, showing their respect for someone they might never have met, but whose service to their country they appreciated. It was a reminder of the unique relationship between the British people and their royal family, built on centuries of tradition but sustained by personal connections and shared experiences. "There's something else," Anne said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Edward had been working on recommendations for when William eventually becomes Prince of Wales. He wanted to ensure a smooth transition and had ideas about how to modernize that role as well. Kate looked at her with surprise. They all knew that someday William would inherit the title of Prince of Wales, but it had always seemed like something far in the future. The reality that they needed to prepare for such changes was sobering. He believed that the Prince of Wales could be more than just a title in waiting, Anne explained. He envisioned it as an active role, focused on bringing together the Commonwealth nations and addressing global challenges like climate change and social inequality. These were issues that both William and Kate cared deeply about, causes they had already been supporting through their various charitable work. The idea that Sir Edward had been thinking about how to expand their impact was both exciting and overwhelming. William appeared in the doorway, dressed in his formal military uniform. The sight of him in full dress uniform always reminded Kate of their wedding day. But today, the ceremonial clothing carried a weight of sadness rather than celebration. "It's time," he said quietly. The drive to Westminster Abbey was unlike any Kate had experienced before. The streets were lined with people, but instead of the usual excitement and cheering that accompanied royal appearances, there was a respectful silence. People bowed their heads as the funeral procession passed, and many could be seen wiping away tears. Inside the Abbey, the great space was filled with a gathering unlike any other. Kate recognized heads of state, religious leaders, diplomats, and members of the extended royal family. But she also saw faces she didn't recognize, people whose lives Sir Edward had touched in ways that might never be fully known. The service itself was beautiful and dignified, with readings chosen by Sir Edward himself before his death. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke about a life dedicated to service, about the quiet dignity with which Sir Edward had carried out his duties, and about the lasting impact of his work on the monarchy and the nation. During the hymns, Kate found herself thinking about the conversations she had had with Sir Edward over the years. He had often spoken about the importance of duty, but also about the joy that could be found in serving something larger than oneself. He had helped her understand that being royal wasn't a burden to be endured, but an opportunity to make a positive difference in the world. As the final prayers were said, Kate noticed that William was struggling to maintain his composure. She reached over and took his hand, providing the same comfort and support that he had given her so many times during their marriage. They were partners in this role, stronger together than either could be alone. The committal service at St. George's Chapel was smaller and more intimate, attended only by close family and friends. Here, the formal protocol gave way to more personal tributes and memories. Stories were shared about Sir Edward's sense of humor, his dedication to his late wife, and his genuine care for the people he worked with. Kate was asked to read one of the tributes, words that Sir Edward's family had asked her to share. As she stood at the lectern, looking out at the small gathering of people who had truly known and loved this remarkable man, she felt the full weight of the responsibility that was being passed to her and William. Sir Edward believed that service. To the crown was service to the people, she read. He understood that the monarchy's strength came not from its traditions alone, but from its ability to adapt and remain relevant to each new generation. His legacy will live on in the work we continue to do in his memory. After the service, as they walked through the grounds of Windsor Castle, William and Kate found themselves alone for the first time in days. The formal ceremonies were over, but the real work of carrying on Sir Edward's legacy was just beginning. He would have wanted us to move forward with his plans for the Commonwealth celebrations, William said, even though he won't be there to guide us through it. Kate nodded, understanding that this was their way of honoring Sir Edward's memory. By implementing his vision for a more inclusive and modern monarchy, they would ensure that his final contribution to the crown would have lasting impact. 2 weeks after Sir Edward's funeral, Kate found herself in an unexpected position. King Charles had asked her to take on the role of coordinating the Commonwealth Day celebrations, the very project that Sir Edward had been working on before, his death. It was an honor that came with enormous responsibility and pressure. She sat in Sir Edward's former office at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by boxes of files and documents that outlined his vision for the upcoming celebrations. The room felt different now, with her personal items mixed among his carefully organized papers. A framed photograph of her children sat beside his fountain pen set, creating a bridge between the past and the future. The phone rang constantly with calls from Commonwealth representatives, event planners, security officials, and media coordinators. Each conversation reminded Kate of the complexity of organizing an event that would be watched by millions of people around the world while honoring the traditions that Sir Edward had held so dear. William entered the office carrying 2 cups of tea, a routine they had established during these intensive planning sessions. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that they were tackling this challenge together, just as they had faced every other aspect of their royal duties. The High Commissioners from Canada and Australia want to discuss the youth participation program, William said, settling into the chair across from her desk. They're excited about Sir Edward's ideas but want to ensure their young people are properly represented. Kate nodded, making a note in the margin of the document she was reviewing. Sir Edward's vision had been ambitious, calling for representatives from all 54 Commonwealth nations to participate in ways that had never been attempted before. Instead of traditional ceremonies with formal speeches and predictable protocols, He had envisioned an event that would showcase the energy and diversity of young people from around the Commonwealth. "I've been thinking about what he wrote here," Kate said, pointing to a handwritten note in Sir Edward's distinctive script. He wanted the celebration to be a conversation, not a speech. He wanted young people to talk about their hopes for the future, their challenges, and their ideas for how the Commonwealth could address global issues. The concept was revolutionary for an institution built on ceremony and tradition. Previous Commonwealth Day celebrations had been dignified but predictable, with formal addresses and carefully choreographed events. Sir Edward's vision would transform it into something dynamic and unpredictable, a genuine exchange of ideas between generations and cultures. Kate's phone buzzed with a text message from their children's nanny. George had a question about homework. Charlotte wanted to know if she could have a friend over for dinner, and Louis was asking when Mummy and Daddy would be home. The normal demands of family life continued even as they dealt with these extraordinary circumstances. "Sometimes I wonder if we're taking on too much," Kate admitted to William. "Sir Edward had years of experience with events like this. What if we make mistakes?" William reached across the desk and covered her hand with his. "Sir Edward chose us for this project. He specifically recommended that you take the lead role in his notes to Father. He believed in our ability to carry this forward. The weight of that trust was both inspiring and intimidating." Kate had grown comfortable with many aspects of royal life, but taking on such a significant project so soon after Sir Edward's death felt like stepping into shoes that might be too large for her. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sir James Morrison, who had been working closely with them on the transition, entered with a folder of updates from various Commonwealth nations. "The responses have been overwhelmingly positive," he reported. "Every nation wants to participate in the youth program, and several have already selected their representatives. The enthusiasm is remarkable." Kate felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. The project was gaining momentum, but that also meant there was no turning back. They were committed to making Sir Edward's vision a reality, regardless of the challenges they might face. "There's something else," Sir James continued. "The BBC wants to broadcast the entire event live, with interactive components that will allow viewers around the world to participate through social media. It would be unprecedented for a royal event." Traditional royal ceremonies were carefully controlled with limited media access and predictable coverage. The idea of opening up a Commonwealth celebration to real-time interaction with the public was both thrilling and terrifying. It represented exactly the kind of modernization that Sir Edward had advocated, but it also meant giving up much of the control that had historically defined royal events. Kate looked at William, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. This was the moment when they had to decide whether to play it safe with a traditional ceremony or take the risk of implementing Sir Edward's more radical vision. "What would he want us to do?" Kate asked aloud, though she already knew the answer. Sir Edward had never been one to avoid calculated risks. He had spent 40 years helping the monarchy navigate changes in society, technology, and public expectations. His final project was meant to be his crowning achievement, a demonstration that the royal family could embrace change while still maintaining their essential role in British and Commonwealth life. "We do it," William said with conviction. "We make it everything he envisioned and more." The decision felt both frightening and liberating. They were committing themselves to an event that could either be a tremendous success or a very public failure. But Kate realized that taking risks was part of their responsibility as future leaders of the monarchy. As the afternoon wore on, they worked through the details of Sir Edward's plans, making modifications where necessary, but staying true to his core vision. Young people from each Commonwealth nation would participate in panel discussions about climate change, social justice, economic opportunity, and cultural preservation. The Queen would participate not as a distant figurehead, but as an engaged participant in the conversations. By evening, Kate felt exhausted but also energized. The project was daunting, but it was also exactly the kind of meaningful work that had drawn her to embrace royal life in the first place. This was an opportunity to use their platform to facilitate important conversations and to demonstrate the relevance of the Commonwealth in the modern world. As they prepared to leave the office, Kate took one last look at Sir Edward's photograph on the desk. In the image, he was smiling slightly, the expression of someone who took satisfaction in work well done. She hoped that wherever he was now, he could see that his final project was in good hands. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet. Both William and Kate lost in thoughts about the magnitude of what they had committed to undertake. But there was also a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before Sir Edward's death, a clearer understanding of how they could honor his memory, while also making their own mark on the institution they served. The weeks leading up to Commonwealth Day were unlike anything Kate had ever experienced. The scale and complexity of coordinating an event involving 54 nations, hundreds of young representatives, and millions of viewers around the world was staggering. Each day brought new challenges and decisions that required careful consideration of diplomatic sensitivities, logistical requirements, and Sir Edward's original vision. Kate had established a temporary office at Westminster Abbey, where the main celebration would take place. The historic venue had been chosen specifically because Sir Edward believed that the weight of tradition would provide the perfect backdrop for discussions about the future. As she worked late into the evening, surrounded by centuries of British history, Kate often felt Sir Edward's presence guiding her decisions. The young representatives from each Commonwealth nation had begun arriving in London, and Kate made it a priority to meet with as many of them as possible. Their energy and enthusiasm were infectious, but she also recognized the enormous responsibility she carried to ensure their voices were heard and their participation was meaningful. One evening, while reviewing the final schedules with William, Kate received a call from Margaret Okafor, a 22-year-old environmental science student from Nigeria who would be representing her country in the climate change discussion. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret said with a slight nervous tremor in her voice, "I wanted to thank you for this opportunity, but I also wanted to ask if it's really okay for us to speak honestly about the challenges our countries face." The question struck Kate as both heartbreaking and hopeful. These young people had been chosen specifically because they had important things to say. Yet they were still uncertain whether their authentic voices would be welcome in such a formal setting. "Margaret," Kate replied, "that's exactly what we want. Sir Edward designed this celebration specifically so that your generation could share your real experiences and ideas. We need to hear the truth about what's working and what isn't." After hanging up the phone, Kate turned to William with tears in her eyes. "These young people are worried about speaking honestly at an event designed specifically for their honesty. What does that say about how we've been doing things?" William reached for her hand, understanding the deeper implications of Margaret's question. For too long, royal events had been carefully scripted affairs, where uncomfortable truths were avoided, in favor of diplomatic pleasantries. Sir Edward's vision represented a fundamental shift toward genuine engagement with real issues. "It says we're doing the right thing by changing," William answered. "And it says Sir Edward was right to push us in this direction." The night before, Commonwealth Day, Kate couldn't sleep. She walked through the quiet corridors of Kensington Palace, thinking about all the ways the next day could go wrong. What if the technology failed? What if the discussions became too controversial? What if they had misunderstood Sir Edward's vision entirely? She found herself in the garden, looking up at the stars and thinking about the conversation she had had with Sir Edward just months before his death. He had spoken about the courage required to let young people lead meaningful discussions about their future, about the importance of showing that the royal family trusted the next generation to handle complex issues with wisdom and grace. "The monarchy's survival depends on its relevance," he had said, "and relevance requires us to engage with the issues that matter most to the people we serve." The morning of Commonwealth Day dawned bright and clear, a good omen that Kate chose to embraced despite her nervousness. As she prepared for the day ahead, she thought about the hundreds of young people who were probably feeling the same mixture of excitement and anxiety that she was experiencing. The first session focused on economic opportunity with representatives from countries as diverse as Jamaica, India, Malaysia, and South Africa, sharing their perspectives on entrepreneurship, education, and employment in their nations. Kate watched from the side of the Abbey, amazed by the sophistication and passion of their discussions. When Kofi Asante, a young entrepreneur from Ghana, spoke about using technology to connect rural farmers with urban markets, Kate could see members of the audience leaning forward with genuine interest. This wasn't the polite attention usually given to ceremonial speeches, but the engaged response of people hearing new and important ideas. The climate change session, led by Margaret Okafor and representatives from Pacific Island nations facing rising sea levels, was even more powerful. As they shared stories about drought, flooding, and displacement, Kate noticed that several older members of the audience were wiping away tears. During a break between sessions, William found Kate in the vestry, where she was reviewing notes. "For the afternoon discussions, it's working," he said simply. "Sir Edward would be so proud of what you've accomplished." Kate felt a wave of relief mixed with continuing anxiety. The morning sessions had been successful, but the afternoon would include discussions of more controversial topics, like social justice and post-colonial relationships within the Commonwealth. When the afternoon sessions began, Kate was struck by the maturity and thoughtfulness of the young representatives as they tackled difficult subjects. Aisha Patel from Canada spoke about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, while David Mwangi from Kenya addressed the ongoing effects of colonial history on African nations. The discussions were sometimes uncomfortable, with honest acknowledgments of past wrongs and current challenges. But they were also hopeful, focusing on ways the Commonwealth could work together to address shared problems and build a more equitable future. The highlight of the day came during the final session, when Queen Elizabeth herself joined the discussion. Instead of delivering a prepared speech, she engaged directly with the young representatives, asking questions about their work and sharing her own reflections on the changes she had witnessed during her long reign. When 20-year-old Priya Singh from India asked the Queen about the biggest lesson she had learned during her decades of service, the Queen paused thoughtfully before answering. "I've learned that leadership means listening more than speaking," she said, "and I've learned that the future belongs to those who have the courage to imagine it differently than the past." As the day concluded, Kate felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with sadness that Sir Edward couldn't be there to see his vision realized. The event had been everything he had hoped for and more, a genuine celebration of Commonwealth diversity and unity that addressed real issues while honoring shared values. The international media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators praising the authenticity and relevance of the discussions. Social media responses from young people around the world indicated that the interactive elements had been successful in engaging a global audience. But more important than the public reception was the feedback from the young representatives themselves. As Kate said goodbye to Margaret Okafor at the reception following the ceremony, the young Nigerian woman hugged her tightly. "Thank you for trusting us to tell our truth," Margaret said. "This is what the Commonwealth should be, a place where all voices matter." Walking back to Kensington Palace that evening, Kate and William reflected on the significance of what they had accomplished. They had successfully implemented Sir Edward's most ambitious vision while also establishing themselves as leaders capable of guiding the monarchy through necessary changes. 6 months had passed since the Commonwealth Day celebration, and the impact of Sir Edward's final project continued to resonate around the world. Kate sat in the same office at Buckingham Palace, where she had first taken on the challenge of implementing his vision, but the space felt completely different now. What had once seemed overwhelming now felt like home, a place where important work was being done. The success of the celebration had led to invitations for William and Kate to visit several Commonwealth nations where they would meet with the young representatives who had participated in the London discussions. These weren't traditional royal tours focused on ceremonial events, but working visits designed to continue the conversations that Sir Edward had initiated. Kate was reviewing the itinerary for their upcoming trip to Australia and New Zealand when William entered the office carrying an official-looking envelope sealed with red wax. "This just arrived from Father," William said, his expression serious but not concerned. "It's about the Prince of Wales transition that Sir Edward had been planning." Kate felt her heart skip a beat. They had known this moment would come eventually, but the reality of it still felt sudden and momentous. The envelope contained the formal documents outlining William's transition to becoming Prince of Wales, along with the expanded responsibilities that Sir Edward had envisioned for the role. As William broke the seal and began reading the contents, Kate thought about how much their lives had changed since that morning when they first learned of Sir Edward's death. What had begun as a profound loss had transformed into an opportunity to reshape their roles and expand their impact on the Commonwealth and beyond. "Father wants to make the announcement next month," William said, looking up from the documents. "The investiture ceremony will incorporate many of the innovations we used for Commonwealth Day. He specifically mentions that Sir Edward's vision should guide how we approach this transition." The irony wasn't lost on Kate that Sir Edward's death had accelerated the very changes he had been advocating for during his lifetime. His passing had created the urgency needed to implement reforms that might otherwise have taken years to achieve. Kate thought about their children, who had handled Sir Edward's death with the resilience that children often display, but who would need to understand what this new title would mean for their family. George, as the eldest, would someday inherit these same responsibilities, while Charlotte and Louis would need to find their own ways to serve the Commonwealth. "There's something else," William continued, reading further into the document. "Father wants you to take on a new role as Commonwealth Youth Ambassador. It would be an official position, the first of its kind, focused on continuing the work we started with the celebration." The proposal was both thrilling and daunting. Kate had found deep satisfaction in working with the young Commonwealth representatives, but taking on an official role would mean even greater responsibilities and expectations. It would also mean that Sir Edward's vision of engaging young people in the future of the Commonwealth would become a permanent part of the monarchy's mission. Over the following weeks, as news of William's impending investiture as Prince of Wales began to circulate, Kate found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Sir Edward's death had been devastating, but it had also freed them to embrace changes that might otherwise have been gradual and tentative. The young people they had worked with during Commonwealth Day had stayed in touch, forming networks and collaborations that extended far beyond the formal event. Margaret Okafor had started a climate action group that connected environmental activists across Africa. Kofi Asante's technology platform was being used by farmers in 12 Commonwealth countries. David Mwangi had been invited to speak at universities around the world about post-colonial relationships and reconciliation. These outcomes were exactly what Sir Edward had hoped for when he designed the celebration. He had understood that the real value would come not from the event itself, but from the ongoing relationships and collaborations it would inspire. As Kate prepared for the investiture ceremony, she often found herself looking at the photograph of Sir Edward that still sat on her desk. His expression seemed to convey approval and encouragement, a reminder that the work they were doing honored his memory while also serving the broader mission of the Commonwealth. The investiture ceremony itself was held at Windsor Castle in Wales, the same location where Charles had been invested as Prince of Wales decades earlier. But unlike that traditional ceremony, this event incorporated many of the innovations that had made Commonwealth Day so successful. Young representatives from Wales and the other nations of the United Kingdom participated in the ceremony, sharing their perspectives on what they hoped the new Prince of Wales would accomplish. The event was broadcast live with interactive elements that allowed people around the world to participate through social media and virtual reality. As Kate watched William take on the formal title and responsibilities of Prince of Wales, she felt a profound sense of continuity with the past and excitement about the future. Sir Edward's influence was evident in every aspect of the ceremony, from the inclusive participation of young people to the use of technology to connect with global audiences. In her own investiture as Commonwealth Youth Ambassador, Kate spoke about the importance of listening to young voices and the responsibility of older generations to create opportunities for meaningful participation in shaping the future. She referenced Sir Edward's belief that the Commonwealth's strength came from its diversity and its commitment to shared values of democracy, human rights, and social justice. As the ceremony concluded and they prepared for the reception, Kate and William found a quiet moment together in one of the castle's ancient chambers. Through the window, they could see the crowds of people who had come to witness this historic moment, but in the quiet stone room, they were simply a couple reflecting on how dramatically their lives had changed. "He would be so proud," Kate said, thinking of Sir Edward and the legacy they were now committed to carrying forward. William nodded, understanding that their grief for Sir Edward had evolved into something more complex and meaningful. His death had been a loss, but it had also been a catalyst for positive changes that might never have occurred otherwise. As they rejoined the reception and mingled with the young people who had become such an important part of their work, Kate felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. Sir Edward's death had taught them that loss could be transformed into purpose, that grief could become a driving force for positive change. The Commonwealth celebrations that had grown out of Sir Edward's final vision were now an annual tradition, with young people from all 54 nations gathering each year to discuss the issues that mattered most to their generation. The conversations they facilitated were making real differences in policy and practice across the Commonwealth. Looking toward the future, Kate could see that Sir Edward's influence would continue to shape their work for years to come. His belief in the power of young people to create positive change had become central to their mission as senior members of the royal family. As the evening wound down and they prepared to return to London, Kate realized that the goodbye they had, shared with Sir Edward 6 months earlier, hadn't been an ending after all. It had been a transformation, a passage from one chapter of their lives to another. His physical presence was gone, but his vision and values continued to guide their work and inspire their commitment to serving the Commonwealth and its people. The grief would always be there, a reminder of how much Sir Edward had meant to them, personally and professionally. But alongside the grief was grace, the understanding that his legacy lived on in the work they were doing and the young people they were empowering to shape the future of the Commonwealth.